It was a stormy night, and I never expected a knock at my door would change everything. When I let my neighbor in from the rain, I thought I was only offering shelter, but what followed was something far deeper than I ever imagined. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, and by nightfall it showed no sign of stopping. I sat alone in my small living room, listening to the steady rhythm of water drumming against the tin roof. The sound was oddly comforting, like nature's own heartbeat. Yet it also reminded me of how empty the house felt when silence took over between the crashes of thunder. The lights flickered once or twice as the storm grew heavier. Outside, the street was nearly invisible, blurred by curtains of rain. I sipped the last of my coffee, breathing in the warmth, when suddenly, I heard it. A faint knocking. At first, I thought it might just be the wind rattling something loose. But then it came again. Clear, hesitant knock. I stood, my pulse quickening in the stillness, and walked to the door. When I opened it, the storm rushed in with a gust of cold air. And there she was, my neighbor. She stood in the doorway, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks, her coat dripping water onto the porch. The lamplight behind me caught the faint shimmer of raindrops still sliding down her skin. She looked both flustered and embarrassed, as if she hadn't meant to intrude, but had no choice. I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice almost drowned by the downpour. "The power went out in my house. I didn't know where else to go." Her words trembled slightly, not just from the cold but from the vulnerability of asking for help. In that moment, she didn't look like the confident woman I often saw tending her garden or greeting neighbors with polite smiles. Tonight, she seemed softer, almost fragile. Without thinking, I stepped aside and held the door open wider. "Come in. Please, you'll catch your death out there." She hesitated only for a moment, then stepped across the threshold. As she passed, I caught the scent of rain-soaked lavender. Her perfume, faint but still lingering despite the storm. Her hand brushed against mine as I reached to take her umbrella, and the coldness of her skin startled me. It made me want to warm her, to do more than just offer a towel and a chair. The door clicked shut behind us, muting the roar of the storm to a muffled backdrop. Inside, the space suddenly felt smaller, warmer, changed somehow by her presence. She stood awkwardly by the door, her wet shoes leaving small puddles on the floor, her hands clutching the lapels of her coat as though to keep in what little warmth remained. And in that instant, as I looked at her, damp, shivering, and yet still so graceful, I realized that this night, this storm, had already taken a turn I could never have predicted. The first thing I noticed when she stepped into the house was how small she suddenly seemed. Not physically. She had always carried herself with a quiet confidence, her posture straight, her steps graceful. But now, dripping from the storm, clutching her coat tightly, she looked almost uncertain. It was strange to see her like that. "You're freezing," I said, moving quickly toward the hallway. "Let me grab you a towel." She gave a nervous laugh, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "I must look ridiculous right now. I didn't mean to impose." "You're not imposing," I replied firmly, pausing just long enough to meet her eyes. They flickered with a mix of relief and hesitation, like she wasn't sure if she should stay. I wanted her to know she could. I returned with a clean towel and handed it to her. Our fingers touched briefly, her hand still cold, mine warm from moving around. She accepted it with a soft thank you, her voice carrying that same delicate tremor I'd heard at the door. As she dried her hair and pressed the towel against her cheeks, I noticed how the lamplight softened her features. The storm had taken away her usual polished look, but somehow, she seemed more human, more real, like the person she was behind the polite smiles and casual greetings across our fences. "Sit down," I urged gently, motioning toward the couch. "I'll make you something hot. Tea, maybe?" She hesitated again, but this time only for a second before nodding. "Tea would be wonderful." In the kitchen, I busied myself with the kettle, trying to ignore the way my heart was beating faster than usual. I kept listening, hearing the faint rustle of her drying her hair, the small sigh she let out as she settled onto the couch. By the time I carried out 2 steaming cups, The room felt warmer, not just from the tea but from her presence. She accepted the cup with both hands, closing her eyes briefly as the steam rose against her face. "This feels heavenly," she murmured. Her shoulders eased, the tension draining from her little by little. I sat opposite her, watching as she sipped slowly. The rain outside kept hammering on the roof, but inside, it was as if we were in another world. Just the two of us, wrapped in a bubble of warmth and flickering light. At one point, the power dipped again, the lights dimming to near darkness before stabilizing. For an instant, her face was lit only by the small glow of the lamp between us. She looked up and our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. But in that silence, I felt something shift. An unspoken acknowledgement that this night was becoming more than a simple favor for a neighbor. And when she pulled the blanket I offered gently around her shoulders, I couldn't stop myself from noticing how natural it felt to care for her. As though I'd been waiting for this chance without even realizing it. The storm raged outside, but inside, time seemed to slow. She sat curled into the blanket, hands wrapped around her cup as though it held not just tea, but comfort itself. The lamplight flickered faintly against the rain-streaked window, throwing soft shadows across her face. I asked her how long she'd lived in the neighborhood. It was a safe question, something ordinary to bridge the quiet. She smiled faintly, a little wistful. "Almost 15 years, she said. "When I first moved here, I thought it would just be temporary. But life has a way of keeping you in one place, doesn't it?" I nodded, sensing there was more behind her words. "Does it feel like home?" She took a moment before answering. "Sometimes. Other times, it feels like I'm just passing through, waiting for something else to happen. Waiting too long, maybe." Her honesty surprised me. I wasn't used to hearing her like this. Most days she seemed composed, self-assured. But tonight her guard was slipping. I leaned back, watching the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup. "I think we all feel that way," I admitted. "Like we're standing at some crossroad, wondering if we're already too late to take another path." She lifted her gaze to me then, her eyes catching the light. There was something vulnerable in them but also searching, like she was testing if I really understood. "And what about you?" she asked softly. "Do you feel lost?" The question hung between us. I could have brushed it off with a joke, but something in her expression told me not to. So I told her the truth. "Most days, yes. I'm young enough to think I should have it figured out, but old enough to realize I don't. I keep wondering if the choices I make now will trap me, or if they'll lead me somewhere better." Her lips parted slightly, as though my words had struck something familiar in her. She set her cup down slowly, her hand brushing against the table as if to steady herself. "You're braver than you think, sharing that," she said. I usually keep those thoughts to myself. It's easier to play the part people expect from me. Strong, certain, unshakable. But most nights, when the house is quiet," her voice lowered, almost a whisper, "it gets lonely." Her confession stirred something inside me. Without thinking, I reached across the table and rested my hand lightly over hers. Her skin was warm now, no longer chilled by the rain, but the faint tremble in her fingers betrayed what she felt. She didn't pull away. Instead, her thumb moved just slightly, as though acknowledging my presence there. A small gesture, yet it carried more weight than any words could. For a long moment, the storm outside faded into nothing. All I could hear was the quiet rhythm of her breathing, and the unspoken truth that we had both revealed pieces of ourselves we rarely showed anyone. And in that silence, I realized, this wasn't just neighborly kindness anymore. Something was unfolding, slowly, inevitably, between us. The storm had been rumbling for hours, but when the power finally gave out, it happened all at once. A loud crack of thunder shook the walls, the lights flickered violently, and then darkness. For a moment, we sat in still silence, the only sound the relentless rain hammering the roof. Then I heard her soft laugh, gentle but a little nervous. "Well, I guess the night just became more interesting." I found the small box of matches by memory, striking one until a warm flame bloomed. Its glow lit her face in pieces, first her eyes, then her lips, then the faint line of her cheek. In the shadows, she seemed both familiar and mysterious, as though I was seeing her for the first time. I lit a candle and set it on the coffee table. The flickering light softened everything, turning the room into a cocoon of gold and shadow. It made the space feel smaller, warmer, and somehow more intimate. She pulled the blanket closer around herself, shifting on the couch. "Do you mind if I sit nearer?" she asked quietly, almost hesitant. I shook my head. "Of course not." She moved over, close enough that her knee brushed mine. The contact was slight, almost accidental, yet neither of us shifted away. Instead, we both let it stay. We spoke for a while, our voices low, like the candlelight itself demanded softer tones. She told me stories from her younger years, adventures, choices she made boldly, mistakes she carried quietly. I listened, sometimes laughing with her, sometimes falling into thoughtful silence. At one point, the candle flame bent with the draft, and the room grew dimmer. She leaned in slightly, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence beside me. Her shoulder brushed mine, a feather-light touch, but enough to send an unfamiliar heat coursing through me. I stole a glance at her. She was watching the candle, her expression calm, though the corners of her lips curled in the faintest of smiles. And then her hand shifted on the couch cushion, inching just near enough that when I let mine relax beside it, our fingers touched. It was the lightest contact, barely there, but I felt it deeply, as if every nerve in my hand awakened in that instant. I didn't pull away, and neither did she. The storm outside grew louder, sheets of rain against the windows, but inside, all I could hear was the rhythm of our breathing, steady yet charged with unspoken tension. She turned her face toward me then, her eyes meeting mine in the flickering light. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. That silence, that closeness, it said enough. And so we sat, two neighbors brought together by chance, two souls drawn closer by a storm, holding onto a small flame in the darkness. The candlelight had burned low, its flame steady but small. Outside, the rain hadn't eased, still pouring against the windows with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The world was still locked in a storm, but here inside, time seemed to slow. She had fallen quiet after her last story, staring at the soft glow of the candle as if weighing something inside her. I could feel it, the shift in her mood, the heaviness in her silence. Her hand was still near mine, our fingers occasionally brushing, neither of us daring to move too far apart. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost uncertain. "You know, I wasn't planning to knock on your door tonight." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "But something about the storm, I didn't want to face it alone." I studied her face, the way her expression softened as she spoke. "I'm glad you did," I replied, and my voice came out more honest than I expected. I didn't realize how much I needed company, too. Her eyes lingered on me then, longer than before. The silence that followed was different now, charged, full of something unspoken that hovered between us. She exhaled slowly, and then, almost in a whisper, said, "You're kind, more than you realize." She hesitated, her hand finally settling gently over mine, her touch warm, steady. It's rare to feel safe like this, with someone. The simplicity of her words sank deep. Safe. That was what she felt with me. I turned my palm upward, letting my fingers close around hers. The contact was tender, deliberate, and as our hands fit together, a quiet warmth spread through me. Something beyond attraction, something deeper. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes now, the way she lowered her guard just enough to let me glimpse the softer parts of her heart. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly, "I worry people only see me as strong, capable. They don't see the other side of me, the parts that still long for closeness." Her words echoed in me. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone in that feeling, that I too carried quiet longings I rarely spoke about. So I did. "I understand more than you think," I said softly. "I've been searching for that too, for someone who doesn't just see me, but stays." listens, cares. She looked at me then. Not just looked, but saw me, as if she were peering past every wall I'd ever built. And in that gaze, I felt a tenderness I hadn't realized I craved. The storm outside roared on, but the world between us grew still. Her thumb brushed lightly over the back of my hand, slow and thoughtful, and I felt the confession in her touch as much as in her words. In that quiet moment, I knew we weren't just neighbors anymore. Something had shifted, gently but irrevocably. When morning finally came, the world felt different. The storm had passed, leaving behind silence broken only by the distant dripping of rain from the eaves. Pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and hesitant, as though it, too, was unsure how to touch this new day. I woke to the faint rustle of movement. She was already up, standing by the window with her arms folded loosely across her chest, watching the wet world outside. Her hair fell in loose strands, touched by the faint morning light, and for a moment I simply watched her, afraid to disturb the quiet. When she turned, she smiled faintly. "You're awake." Her voice carried the gentleness of dawn, but there was something guarded in it, too, like the weight of reality had returned with the daylight. I sat up, pulling the blanket from my shoulders. The memory of the night before, our closeness, her hand in mine, the honesty we'd shared, lingered in the air between us. But now, in the brightness of morning, it felt fragile, like a secret that could vanish if we spoke too loudly. She walked back to the couch and sat down beside me, but not as close as before. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture composed. I sensed her retreat, a careful step back into the role of neighbor, of someone who might pretend the storm hadn't happened. I cleared my throat softly. "How did you sleep?" Her smile flickered. "Better than I thought I would." Then, after a pause, she added, "Because I wasn't alone." The words warmed me, but I also heard what she left unsaid. She was hesitant, unsure how far to carry what we'd begun. I reached for the moment carefully, not wanting it to slip away. "Last night," I began, then stopped. The silence pressed in, and I gathered my courage. It meant something to me, more than I can explain. Her eyes met mine then, steady but shadowed with hesitation. "It meant something to me too," she admitted quietly. "But mornings are different, aren't they? They make you wonder if the night was real, or just a passing comfort." Her honesty cut deep because it was the truth I had feared, that maybe we were only bound by rain, by candlelight, by loneliness. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low, sincere. "It doesn't feel like that to me. Not just comfort. Not something passing." Her lips parted as though to reply, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached out, her hand finding mine again. The touch was slower this time, more deliberate. She laced her fingers with mine, and the morning light caught the faintest shimmer of moisture in her eyes. "I want to believe that," she whispered. The room held its breath with us. Outside, the world was washed clean, the storm swept away. Inside, though, the storm had left something behind, a bond that daylight could not erase. And as we sat there, hand in hand, I knew this was no passing comfort. It was a beginning. The hours after the storm felt strangely calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do with what had begun between us. We lingered together through the morning, still hand in hand, our words softer, fewer, but filled with meaning. Eventually, she stood to gather her things. "I should head back," she said, her voice quiet, though her reluctance was clear. She looked around my small living room, the blanket draped over the couch, the half-melted candle still on the table, as though each object had absorbed the memory of the night. I walked her to the door, neither of us rushing. At the threshold, she paused. The sunlight spilled across her face, catching the faint traces of tiredness, but also a tenderness I hadn't noticed before. She turned to me, and her voice softened. "Thank you for last night, for listening, for being there." I could have let her go with that, let it be a passing moment, tucked away in memory. But the thought of retreating to separate lives, of pretending nothing had shifted, felt unbearable. I took a slow breath. "I don't want this to end at the door," I admitted. My voice trembled slightly, but I didn't look away. "Last night, it wasn't just the storm. It was us. And I don't want to lose that." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Her eyes searched mine, cautious but bright with something fragile and hopeful. Then, with a small step forward, she closed the distance between us. Her hand lifted, resting gently against my chest, her palm warm over my heartbeat. "I don't want to lose it either," she whispered. The world seemed to quiet in that moment. I felt the weight of her touch, steady and grounding, as if she was choosing not just me, but the possibility of us. Without thinking, I lifted my hand to cover hers, holding it against me. "Then let's not." Her lips curved into a smile. Not wide, not certain, but real. She leaned in then, resting her forehead lightly against mine. The closeness was tender, charged not with urgency but with promise. I could feel her breath against my skin, the faint tremor of relief in her exhale. We stood there in the doorway, the storm long gone but its echo lingering in us, binding us in a quiet new truth. Finally, she pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. "One step at a time?" she asked, her tone both cautious and playful. I nodded. "One step at a time." And then she slipped her arms around me, her cheek pressing softly against my shoulder. I held her close, feeling the steadiness of her embrace, the quiet certainty that we had begun something worth holding on to. When she finally stepped back to leave, it was not with distance but with promise. The day was bright now, the air fresh, the storm washed away. But in my heart, I knew. Last night wasn't just shelter from the rain. It was the beginning of something we had both been waiting for, quietly, for far too long. Sometimes the smallest choices, like opening the door on a rainy night, can change everything. What began as shelter from a storm became the start of something far more lasting. Maybe love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures, but with quiet moments that ask us to listen, to stay, and to hope again. Sparkles, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who believes in unexpected love. And of course, subscribe for more slow-burn true romance stories like this one. Your support means the world, and it helps me keep telling stories that remind us all that love can happen when we least expect it. 10.